Our first scene is in Fremont, Nebraska, where a motor car train is being worked. You can see the mail bags and the cream cans, and here is the passenger car. The Chicago Northwestern shared a depot with the Union Pacific in Fremont, and the Fremont sign that we're seeing is on the north side of that depot where the Northwestern passengers boarded their trains. The Union Pacific line came by on the south side of the depot. This is the area around the depot and showing some of the signage and some of the buildings. And we're now in an area of the facility known as the RIP track. RIP stands for Repair in Place, and we see workmen working to repair damaged freight cars. You'll note the gentlemen do not have hard hats. They are using, for the most part, hand tools as opposed to machine tools, and this was very difficult, strenuous, heavy work. We're reflooring a flat car in that scene, putting a new wooden deck on it. And this gentleman is doing a decal on a freshly painted caboose, which will have the Chicago Northwestern emblem. There we see a gentleman with a cutting torch, and he's going to cut a damaged drawbar and then replace it so that the coupling can be made between two cars. There were several tracks being worked simultaneously in this RIP track area. We see a typical safety sign there, and now we're going to see some switching taking place in the Fremont yard. This area of Nebraska did not have pipelines at this time, and so a lot of the petroleum products were loaded in tank cars, and we see a switch engine switching those. We're now at the Fremont Roundhouse, which was a very large roundhouse, and we see all the workers that were needed to maintain steam engines during this era, and now they're moving the turntable a little bit. Now we've completed our shot of the turntable, and we have the workers going back to work in the roundhouse. The engine that we're seeing is a 280 wheel arrangement. This next scene shows workers at the freight house in Fremont. A lot of the freight that came in what we call LCL, or less than carload loads. And the freight house worked that sort of thing. We now switch to a scene where we're going to put down some fresh ballast along a section of the railroad line, and we have a work train. The problem is that it's winter and the ballast has frozen, so we have men working in the cars and trying to break loose the ballast so that it can be dumped. And they're still in there trying to break the ballast as you see them swinging the axes and so on, and then you can see the ballast flowing out of the side of the car. This is a typical motor car train, such as was used on the various branch lines in the state of Nebraska. Here we have some railroad employees who work in the various shanties and shacks, and an old railroad crossing sign with barber pole on it. That is the freight house in Fremont, and you can see the strings of freight cars that were positioned for loading and unloading. This is the north side, or Chicago Northwestern side, of the Union Station. On the other side will be the Union Pacific. And Graham Ice Cream Company was one of the businesses. Here we have workers coming out of the freight house and dispatcher's office and on their way home apparently at the end of the workday. This is a typical motor car train, except the last car in the train is a special car called a business car. And there's some sort of dignitaries or celebrities getting off that car at the station there in Fremont. We don't know what the occasion was, but it was something special. Here's a gentleman going to work at the freight depot. And we see scenes of workers transferring those less than carload lots of freight. were using hand carts to take them in and out of the freight cars and in and out of the warehouse. It was very labor intensive, and this is way before the day where we had conveyor belts to use. Uh, there would be many of these people working these less than carload freight car shipments. And of course, today the modern equivalent is FedEx and UPS. Notice the boxes that are stacked up there on the platform. And now we transition to a real fun thing. Uh, the Chicago Northwestern Railroad sponsored a girls softball team, and we're watching that team in action. We're at the fairgrounds in Arlington, Nebraska, which is along the main line east of Fremont. And we're at the fairgrounds, and you can see the girls with the C&NW emblem on the back of their shirts. Now, the opposing team was apparently people from Arlington, and we noticed those women. Some of them are playing softball in long skirts, which must have been very hard. The girls from the C&NW team have shorts, and of course you can see we have a very fast runner going around the bases. This might be a home run or at least a triple. We'll see. And across the home plate she comes. It's possible that the daughter of our cinematographer was playing on this team, and he got a number of shots of her running the bases because he wanted to have some home movies of the day. There you see somebody and throwing, and you can see some of the opposing team in the longer skirts. Probably there was a men's team that the railroad sponsored about this point in time, and the railroad, there were many railroad employees, and the railroad would sponsor athletic teams and various other types of activities. Here we see a parade in Fremont, and the C&NW entry consists of a replica of the Pioneer, which was the first steam engine on the C&NW. And here it comes along the street, bell ringing and smoke coming out of the stack, and it's pulling a vintage passenger car, complete with a drumhead sign on the rear. We have various officials and dignitaries, and there's the sign telling how much money was spent in the Fremont area. This is a replica of a Union Pacific streamliner that was part of the parade. And it appears that the towns kids are having a lot of fun. The gentleman in uniform is a railroad policeman or a city policeman, and there's our railroad crew. And we take a shot along the train, and there's the conductor in a typical uniform for that period. This motor car is a rail detector car, and this is a hand pump maintenance of the way hand car. Now we have a view of a Union Pacific streamline train coming through Fremont. This would not have been a regular run. It was probably a demonstration run, because the streamliners on the Union Pacific came through Fremont at night. And I mentioned that we had a number of activities. We have the Employees Club, Chicago and Northwestern Band, complete with bass drum with the band's name on it, and you can see the various instruments and the various musicians. Now we start our tour of the three lines, and we're going out of Fremont. We're going to cross the Union Pacific main line at a tower called Ames Tower. Then we cross the Platte River on a very long bridge. We are looking across the bridge from the north end. On the south end of the bridge, there was a train register station known as Platte River. There was no place for people to board the train or for freight to be unloaded. It was simply a point where the three branches headed out south of Fremont split, and the branch from Fremont to Lincoln, Nebraska, then went ahead and went on a separate path, and the Superior and Hastings branches continued. The first town that was along the combined branches to Superior and Hastings was the town of Morse Bluff. The railroad line from the Platte River Bridge through Morse Bluff almost all the way to the next town of Linwood was down in the Platte River Valley. There was a severe flood caused by ice jams in the Platte River, and many miles of that track was washed out. The railroad elected not to replace that track, and for a number of years served the stub end of the branch lines out of Seward. Eventually, of course, all the lines were abandoned. Linwood was a fairly important point on the C&NW branch line system. At the west end of Linwood, the Superior branch and the Hastings branch split. At Linwood, we had a fairly large depot, as you can see, and we had a two-stall engine house. The engine house was used for a number of years and then was no longer needed when the combined passenger trains from the two branches ran as one train on into Fremont. The Linwood area had a fairly large yard, and there was switching done to put together and take apart trains for the two branches as they split west of Linwood. We have a motor car train which is stopped at the depot in Linwood, and we're not sure whether it's the one going on down to Superior or Hastings. The conductor is giving the highball for the train to leave town. The next town on the line to Hastings is Octavia, and following Octavia, we come to a larger community called David City. In the town of David City, the Chicago and Northwestern crossed the Burlington and also the Union Pacific. We have a group of railroader track workers on a motor car to maintain the track, and they are on their way to the next work site. The next town was Millerton, and we see the station agent's wife and children walking across the platform at the depot. Our next town was a town called Surprise. The station agent and his wife are shown walking along the station platform. The next town along the line was the town of Gresham. At Gresham, apparently, not only the station agent and his family got into the picture, but also some of the other railroad workers, as there are a number of spouses and children in the picture. The next station on down the line was the town of Thayer, and you can see some freight cars sitting in the yard there at Thayer. The next town was York. At York, there was a large college and there a fairly large community. Here we see a passenger train going through the depot at York. Next down the line was the town of Charleston, and that town became a ghost town, visible along Interstate 80 for many years until the buildings were finally torn down. The next town was Henderson, and the Henderson depot has been replicated and is still around. Stockham was the next stop along the line, and then there was a small town of El Dorado. El Dorado, the railroad missed the town sort of on the edge, sort of skirted the town. And the next town of Harvard, the railroad went alongside the Burlington and then crossed the Burlington to the southwest of town. The next town we're coming to is Inland. The Inland Depot is in poor condition but still standing. And finally, we arrive at our destination at the end of the branch at Hastings. This is a nice brick depot. We can see the motor car train there at Hastings. We see some station activity and moving some cream cans and working some mail. Here we have a Santa Fe boxcar and an old truck, and we have some bales of hay that are going to be loaded onto a boxcar for movement somewhere. Hastings was, as I mentioned, the end of the line, and the Hastings branch was abandoned completely in 1942. The next line was the Superior line. We see the Ideal Cement plant west of Superior. Although it was served by the Burlington Railroad, the Chicago Northwestern hauled a number of cement cars out of Superior. Another major shipper in Superior was the Farmers Union Creamery. In the Superior yard, there were a number of sheds and shanties for the track workers and for carmen that serviced the cars in the Superior area. Superior, of course, being the end of the branch, had a number of facilities. Here we see the Chicago Northwestern switch engine, which is a 460, which is moving in the yard in Superior. And now we have the motor car train ready to leave Superior to head up the branch to Fremont. We're now leaving Superior. We see the water tower of the engine facilities. The Roundhouse in Superior was a joint facility which serviced both Chicago Northwestern and Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe engines, and the yards were joint. All the switching was done by the Chicago and Northwestern. First town north of Superior was Cadams, had a very small depot, and that Cadams depot was gone by the early 30s. Now we're moving on north, and we're coming to the town of Nora. And this is the Nora depot that we're passing. Beyond Nora, we had some cattle pens. The next town is Oak and a water tower as we go past. The next town of Davenport, the Chicago Northwestern line crossed the Union Pacific, St. Joseph, and Grand Island line. There was a joint depot at Davenport, which was the old Chicago Northwestern depot, and also did business for the Union Pacific. And now we're at Carlisle. We're now to the town of Shickley, and we're moving on further north. Here we have a handcar off the track, and we're coming to a large town called Geneva, Nebraska. The Burlington paralleled the C&NW in the Geneva area. Next town north was Sawyer, and we crossed another Burlington line there. Then we come to Exeter. As we go through Exeter, we're crossing the Burlington main line, and you can see the crossing tower and the signals. The next town that we are coming to is the town of Cordova, and a nice station platform there. Then next town we come to will be Beaver Crossing, a fairly large yard there and some facilities. From Beaver Crossing, we then next come to the town of Goner. We have a triple meet here. We have a steam engine, a 460 on a freight train in the siding, and then at the end we have the opposing motor car going the opposite direction. Now we are approaching the crossing of the Burlington Railroad south of Seward, and we'll cross that line and then go past the Seward Depot. The next town that we will come to will be the town of B, and we see the depot at B, and then as we move further north, we come to the town of Dwight. That depot is still intact and has been restored by the Novacek brothers of Seward, who own the grain facility. The town of Brainerd, the Union Pacific also went through Brainerd. We continue on north, and we will soon be approaching the town of Bruno. And of course, it has its usual platform, water tank, And then we come to the town of Abie, Abie, and our next town on up the line will be Linwood, where the Superior and Hastings branches join. We go past the Linwood Depot. We can see the water tower in the background. And now we're back in Fremont. Back in Fremont, somebody must be late for work. He's running to work. And then we have other C&NW officials. Now we're going to go on the main line east toward Missouri Valley, and we're in the town of Arlington, where there was a rather large nursery called Marshall's Nursery. They were a big shipper on the railroad, and we see all the workers at Marshall's Nursery, including the office staff. We will then be noticing some trees that are getting ready to be shipped by rail. They come out of the nursery on an antique truck, and here they are. They're going to be loaded in the boxcars at Arlington. Here we have the Arlington station with a station agent with his official station agent's cap. And here we have some workers who are working on the track, doing maintenance. The next town east of Arlington is Kennard, and we see the station agent. Then we come to the town of Blair. Blair had an interesting depot with the east-west main line of the C&NW going past the north side of the depot, and here comes an engine, and it is a light engine with no cars. We had the other side of the depot that was the Omaha Road side of the depot. Here we have an Omaha Road passenger train pulled by a 460, a 5-car train, and now we're at California Junction, which is east of Blair, and we have another light engine move. We are now at the rather large C&NW Roundhouse in Missouri Valley. That's a 280 Zulu class engine, and you can see the rather extensive roundhouse and coaling facilities. And there was a very large yard there. A lot of trains were broken up and put back together. Here we see a couple of workers apparently on their way to work, crossing the yard, and the usual signs and indications. Here we have a gentleman, apparently he left his lunch in his car, and now he's ready to go to work. We had some old passenger equipment converted to maintenance of the way. Here comes another worker across the many tracks, and he's getting ready to do his daily stint. Here we have the Missouri Valley Depot, and it was a very busy depot. We are now west of Missouri Valley at the Missouri River Bridge at Blair, and we have a bridge tender, and that's his shack where he can hang out in bad weather. Now we're going down the Omaha line, and here we have a passenger train with a 460, and the engineer, we're going to take some water, and there goes the train. These trains were Sioux City to Omaha trains, and they were fairly well patronized at this point in time in the early 1930s. There were a number of trains, and here we have another train on that line, and that one happens to be a motor car propelled train. Now we're moving south along the line to the town of Washington. We see the agent and his wife. And the next town further down the line is Bennington, wife and small child. And we have some section workers with ties that are going out to be replaced. Next town is Irvington, and we have the railroad dog as well as the staff in this view, and a gentleman showing you his dexterity in climbing the pole for the order boards. Here's a signal, an old-fashioned signal called a wigwag signal, fairly common on the C&NW. Now we're in an area of Omaha, and we're along Dodge Street, quite a ways out in West Omaha. The city is not built out to that location yet, but what we do have is we have a stock train, and it's going past some rather large grain elevators, and those grain elevators were active for a number of years. Here we have the section gang, and we have the 1468, a 280 on that stock special, and we're going to see him departing town in just a moment or two. Here he comes. The movement of livestock on the Chicago Northwestern and the Omaha Road was a heavy movement from time to time. Here we have some work equipment. This is an early version of a Jordan spreader, and it appears they're going to grade so they can put down some additional tracks, and we have that Jordan spreader working. That may be the foreman of the crew, and again we get to see some action as the Jordan spreader moves and smooths the dirt out so that it will be level so that they can then lay some tracks. Now we're back in Fremont, and apparently the employees group planted a series of trees. So we see a number of movies of these evergreen trees. The north side of the joint station with the Fremont lettering. Now we're going to take a ride down the line to Lincoln, and we're going from north to south. The first town is Cedar Bluffs. Next town is the town of Colon. Then we come to the town of Wahoo. South of town, there was a 3 railroad crossing, all within a matter of feet of each other. Then the town of Sweetburg. Sweetburg was at the top of a steep grade. The next town south would be Geneva, Nebraska. And here we have some workers, again, moving ties and getting ready to replace ties. And this little town, it's a little bit hard to tell exactly what it is, but apparently we have a station agent of sorts. The next town will be Davie, and Davie would be just north of Lincoln. We've now arrived in Lincoln. There was a very large freight house, similar to the one in Fremont, that was shared with the Missouri Pacific Railroad, and a lot of hand trucks and less than carload shipments. Here we have the staff getting off at the end of the day, coming out the south door, and we have a C&NW caboose and some more staff, and we also have a car department where car repairs were made, and the usual safety messages that were used throughout the railroad. We are now moving out of town, and we're at 17th Street, and there was about a 4 or 5 stall C&NW Roundhouse in Lincoln. We have workers, and compared to today where we have big track machines, there was a lot of heavy, just manual labor involved in working and fixing the track. Now we're back in Fremont, and we have the ladies going home at the end of their workday. And we have a gentleman who apparently may be a dispatcher coming to work the evening trick, somebody who's done for the day, headed home. And we have one of those interesting motor car trains there near the Fremont Depot. You can see the mail sacks, and here comes the motor car train past us.